Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we're having an extra special episode because I'm here with the amazing Chet Williams, who helped me get my start. We're also meeting with an architectural photographer here in Ventura, Stephen Schafer, that reached out to me. So we're sitting outside his house right now. We're going to go and talk to him. He's written a book, 66 Reasons to Not Become a Commercial Photographer. It's called Don't Shoot. It's in there somewhere. I'm almost getting the title right, but he's a very interesting guy from what I've read so far, but I haven't looked at his website, haven't looked at his Instagram feed, none of that. So this will be interesting. Let's see how it goes. Stephen Schafer?
Stephen Schafer. I go by Schäf.
Goes by Schäf. You knew of me just through my podcast, mostly because it had photography in the in the line, but have listened to quite a few of the podcasts and have reached out to me.
I knew you were in town.
I was in town because I probably posted some stuff in that area.
Yeah, you just said winter
yes.
out here. Sounds very posh.
It's turning into that. From someone who comes from a very non-posh background to get to the point where you can actually leave a region for a season. It starts to feel that way.
I thought I got the sense that you actually have a season of lower productivity in Maine, probably because of the winter, which I don't know. Right? I mean, I could be out, in the field right now taking photographs, and would be, doing a job if it wasn't for schedule changes. So this worked out really well.
Cool. So the one of the things I'm really interested in talking to you about is, for one, you're a photographer, and I don't actually get that many photographers on this podcast, for one, because there's this, not conflict of interest, but when I see other people who are my immediate competition within my area, it's a difficult emotional ride for me to actually know what they're doing, what kind of work they're getting, and why I'm not getting it. So it's
false advertising, basically.
So it's like I always distance myself from that too much, because there's this feeling of, I'm going to fail and be homeless if I know about that too much. So there's that kind of weird self-employed creativity that you have to struggle with, that emotional situation. But it's great to meet with someone who's on the other side of the country, who probably won't, we won't like step on your toes too much. And
I'm going after your clients.
That's
totally.
So I'd like to know just about your background, how you got into this, what you've learned, and you've written a book that both Chet and I here have. I've gotten up to 56 as of yesterday, which I love how you approach this. I love how it's in these like one-page snippets that you can digest, that will be very poignant things that will sit in your mind as you develop as a photographer, to run into the situation that you remember reading about. And as an assistant, you might say, I should be quiet right now and just observe and make sure the photographer, so it's all really cool stuff. I'm really happy to be here. So give us your background, explain who you are and how you got here to people who might be listening.
Yeah, I am a Ventura pretty much native. Been here my whole life. Went to public school here, and then wanted to become a photographer, much to my parents' chagrin. My German parents, who were like, "No, become a dentist," which wasn't all that attractive.
Whoa! I went a year and a half. I was going to try and impress, at the time, a girlfriend's family to be a dentist, and now my youngest son, wants to be a photographer. So, and when I told my dad that I was leaving the practice of architecture to become a photographer, he LOL'd. He laughed out loud and said, "You'll never, take care of a family doing that." And then in the first year, I made more money than him. So I was like, but I remind him of that every year. So
yeah. Well, when your son becomes a dentist, it's going to be super ironic,
right?
It's like, crap, how did that happen? I think the trade-off for my parents was, when I was really insistent, it's like, look, I'm doing photography in high school. I really like it. They're like, all right, we found a school where you can get a degree and it's in photography. So that was their jam. And the Brooks Institute was here in Santa Barbara, right up the road.
At the time, it was in Santa Barbara,
At the time, it was in Santa Barbara before it moved to Ventura and then imploded. I went to Brooks for 2 years, so I'm technically an art school dropout, and then started assisting, and started also going to everything I possibly could gather for my portfolio that I thought would be relevant to the people I was willing to cold call, which, not everybody's willing to cold call. And then you have in past podcasts sort of talked about, hey, give yourself 5 years and you'll get to the point where you'll start, being ready. People will call you and so on and so forth. And it's that 5 years and 10 years, right? It's like started a business.
Well, you started very young too, right?
Yeah, in 89, I was 19. I was just so anxious to get out of school.
Yeah.
At 19, I started working on my studio. And then at 20, I pretty much opened the doors and said, hire me. Now, the benefit for me was that I was doing weddings on the side, and able to launch that into enough of an income to purchase equipment and sort of keep the studio doors open, even though rent was only $500 a month. And then there was a pivot when I got really tired of weddings, where it was just like, I got to stop doing these things. And I was getting enough of them by referral because people liked the photography I was doing. And weddings at that time were medium format with a Rolleiflex, 12 shots, reload your Rolleiflex, have 2 of them, have on-camera flashes, pretty formal, not a lot of candid stuff yet. Went definitely into a different direction, but I didn't love it. I was mentioning that I have a little story about that. And at the time I had a really close friend, Stephanie Hogue. She has a studio here, or a gallery here, a photographic gallery in town. Steph. Yeah. She was getting out of Brooks. She graduated Brooks and was indoctrinated into the Brooks mindset of wedding photographers are lowlifes. And we were hanging out, and I was making money with it. And I said, you just got to try this and get into it. And she got into it, and I had been doing it for years, since I was 17. And within 2 years, she was far exceeding any wedding stuff that I had done. And the difference was she loved it, right? So it's that passion and that
for you, what was the burnout in wedding photography that was difficult that wore on you?
I hate people. So there's
This is me. This is me.
Yeah. So architecture.
Not that you hate people, but the hurting of people to get to a creative end can be very difficult.
If you are working with people and working with their expectations, and you're taking pictures of them, and you don't have the luxury of time where you can say, I'm going to take your picture now, and in 10 years, you're going to love this photograph.
Right.
But right now, you're going to apply all your flaws and all your hopes and dreams. And if I don't make you look like Claudia Schiffer, I'm showing my age there. I don't know any current models. But
she's still good.
Yeah, if I don't make you look like a model, I've failed. When I started out in business here in Ventura, in a tiny little 900 square foot studio, in the tiny 900 square foot studio next to mine was another photographer, Rick Kasnoff, who just shot people. And we had this deal: if it comes in the door of the building and it breathes, you shoot it. If it doesn't breathe, I'll shoot it. And at that point, I was transitioning out of weddings. It was sort of a happy place. I could shoot products, and I enjoyed the interaction with the art directors and the account executives and all the people involved in that for the most part, and just didn't work for the people that I didn't enjoy working for. So it's a small market in Ventura. So we're 60 miles north of Los Angeles, which is the major market where you could necessarily shoot anything or be a specialist. Whereas in Ventura, you pretty much have to be a universalist. You have to be able to shoot products and people and things and all of those, whatever comes through the door. It was a different time. It was it was really the 90s and 2000s where I could make a living and pay the rent shooting $200 little product shots on a white seamless. And all of that work has vaporized in the world of an iPhone and knockout software.
Well, yeah, that, and then just a little softbox and eBay and
All of those photographs in my first 20 years were taken on transparency film and scanned on a laser scanner. And I did reshoots because there was a piece of dust on something, which you could clone out in seconds now because there was no Photoshop. So, it was definitely trial and error. And about 5 years in, people started calling me, even though I'd been knocking on their doors for 5 years and going, why isn't anybody calling me? And I mentioned it in the book. After 5 years, people realize you're not just a fly-by-night. It's like, oh, he's been around. I've been seeing his work. I've seen him in the ad club. He's out there. I can, if not take him seriously, I can at least start paying attention. And if his price is comparable and his work is comparable, then I'll give him a shot. And then
so there's this kind of like, there's this time period that, like, no matter your talent, if you've been able to stay in business that long, there'll be people who can't recognize talent who will still give you a call because your name's just been floating on the surface that amount of time.
Yeah.
Credibility.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's a bunch of referrals. And you eventually get to the point out at 10 years, I would say, if you're going to make real big generalizations, at 10 years, you sort of realize that you're getting jobs from people who are no longer looking or no longer asking any other photographers. They're not getting 2 bids. They're not getting 3 bids. You're their photographer. You've created that relationship. They're super comfortable. They know you're fair. They know your prices are fair. Every time Vicky needs a photographer, Vicky calls me. Every time Barbara calls me. They don't call the other photographers in town who do the same stuff, whose photography is, generally just as good, right? Then you can start to, really push yourself, and technically you could raise your prices and do all those photography things. Now it's sort of a different world out there. Right?
Yeah, if we're someone who's like in their 20s, mid-20s right now, starting out, do you think the landscape of how their professional growth would go? Do you think what would be the drastic differences that you could maybe outline from 3 guys sitting around talking about photography with gray hair in their beards?
Beards, first of all, got to grow a beard. Yeah. Apparently, we don't like shaving.
Hides your age, I guess.
Lazy.
I don't know. That too. And also, what's your pet car that you have?
Well, I used to be the guy that rolled up in a Saab 900. And
which out here is rare. Where he lives, that's a thing.
It's common.
Well, yeah, but it was the red SPG, but it fits a 9-foot seamless. So it wasn't completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I didn't have enough money to have anything really crazy. I was the used car guy pretty much. That's like, all right, I'm always buying a 6, 7, 8-year-old
The thing
car.
I've found with every single photographer I meet is even if it's a cheap car, they'll have a pet in the car in a way.
It has something going, right? It's like there's something different about it. You can't drive up in a Rolls Royce because people go, oh, we're paying him too much.
Right.
So there is a little dance you have to do there. I drive a Nissan SUV now with a roof rack on top for my platform.
Yeah.
That has
see mine out the window.
That has 4-wheel drive and allows me to shoot from 11 feet without having to get up on a ladder. I've had some cool little cars. My wife had an Audi TT and it was like in every photograph of every building, commercial building. It's like, hey, I need you to park right there because it's small and low and looks really good. Yeah, designy. I have a friend who's a car guy. It's like, bring your Lexus. I know you don't have a front license plate. I don't have to Photoshop it out. It's like these really weird, random. It's like, you just park it right there. So.
Did you find, so you're in the same age range I am, did you find that transition from 2002, 3, 4 to 2007 when things started going digitized? Do you think that the kids that are upcoming now are going to face a similar reality with AI? Like, we had this huge shift where suddenly things were like completely different. They were a lot easier, but you still had to have...
And I got a huge foot in the door because of that transition to digital. I went to architecture school. Yeah. And then when I started shooting, I had seen that, you can make money as a photographer because he started doing it. And we were friends from high school. Yeah. And so I was like, and he literally called me and said, look, you've got this in with architects because you speak the language and it's your background and you've shown interest in photography. Why don't you go into that? Because I had left that because I couldn't take it anymore. So I had that. I had learned Photoshop in architecture school and I could put things together. I didn't know how to light, but I could understand composition because of my training. And so I used Photoshop to compensate for my inability to light things, but that accidentally gave me a really natural looking aesthetic to my work because I wasn't overlighting it. I was having to compensate in post and I just liked a more natural look where you could not tell that you were blasting light into it to balance things out. That was my foot in the door. I wonder what the new crew of photographers coming up right now, what's going to be their foot in the door technologically, if there's the same thing that we're going to trip over and not understand. Because the guy in my area that was the big guy, he had to transition from already knowing how to shoot film into digital, and that made his work look worse at the time because he was having to erase a piece of paper and write something new. I was writing on a clean sheet of paper.
Right. I did that transition. I was reluctant to dive in. I don't know where I picked this up. If you've ever heard of the term optimizer. I think I'm a natural optimizer. So when I have a 24 megapixel camera, I want a 36 megapixel camera. And so I'm constantly looking at, wow, can I optimize my tool or my workflow in a way? And then I want to do that. And usually it's my issue and my client hasn't asked for the things to get better, right? So when my clients were pretty satisfied with my 12 megapixel photographs, and I bought the 25 megapixel camera, they didn't notice, right? So it was for me, and I listened to other podcasts. Sorry, I hate to break it to you.
I don't know how many battery grips I bought to try and impress people.
I listened to other podcasts and they're like, yeah, I'm still shooting on my old, 1D or, and that's the thing is it totally works. And my clients at the time of the transition didn't care what I was shooting on. And so I sort of stretched it out and kept shooting on my Hasselblad as people were buying the sort of crappy 5 and 6 megapixel, pro level cameras that came out and what they wanted was digital delivery. They wanted, so I just took I switched from transparency to negative. I photographed all the things in the studio. I was still mostly a studio shooter at that time, doing product. Bigger studio, different building. Took it, had it all scanned. At the time, you could have Kodak photo CD scans done at sort of this, whatever they called high resolution, gave you what was better than the 6 megapixel camera by far. And you had this negative that you could go back to and laser scan if you had to. Delivered on a CD. It was before DVDs, like that at that moment. And the clients were like, yeah, great. All right. They could put it into their version of Photoshop 2.0, before layers and clean up the dust or, enhance the colors, send it off to get printed. And it was a world where everything was printed, right? So I learned CMYK color spaces and I learned, how to saturate or desaturate colors so that it would look good in print. I have a book right there of tear sheets, for you if you want to sort of see. This is the kind of stuff that I was doing at the time. I can't remember the last time anything I have photographed ended up in print unless it accidentally ended up in a magazine. Right. So you're doing magazine work, but now the workflow to get to ink on paper has changed so much that you probably don't need to know too much about the printer's job.
No, not
did.
really.
Yeah, and I got sort of into it, wanting to be like, all right, if I can know more about the printer's job, my photographs will look better in the end. I was also doing direct mail pieces, so occasionally I would print my own stuff. I found it fascinating, so I went down that rabbit hole, got good at that, and brought something to the table there. So now I know a little bit about architectural history and a little, I know the difference between a gable and a dormer and that kind of stuff. And so I can speak the language to my new set of clients and they appreciate that. And you've mentioned that before. It's like you have to be able to sort of talk the talk.
Yeah.
And point things out. In my world, I'm looking for ghosts a lot of times. I'm documenting a building. We haven't really talked about what I'm doing now, but we'll get there. I'm documenting a building that's historic, that's gone through massive change, that might be demolished in the week after I'm done. And understanding that change, like, well, this is an addition, and these windows aren't original, and this is original, and this goes all the way back to when the building was built, and this was done in the 50s. Understanding those parts of it helps me know what to document and how to document it. Understanding what's getting altered in the future, or if it's just getting wiped off the face of the earth. So it's sort of jokingly the Grim Reaper of photography, right? I'm the last guy to see the building standing. I take pictures of it, and then on film, I go to the lab, I look at the film, and I go, yeah, this looks good. I call the client, I go, you can start the bulldozers now.
Oh, wow.
I'm the last, once the film is filmed, right, you're good to take it down.
Who triggers that work? When they want something documented like that, is that coming from a local historical society? Is that coming from a builder who wants to show what they had there before they build their new condos or whatever they're putting in, replacing it?
In California, it comes from a regulatory framework that's usually attached, this gets sort of complicated, to the California Environmental Quality Act, where we in California have said, look, historic buildings are part of the environment, they're a cultural resource. You don't have to keep them all, but if you're going to demolish something, there's this Library of Congress program called the Historic American Building Survey. There's also one for engineering and another one for landscapes, cultural landscapes, which we just nickname HABS, HAER, and HALS. The Historic American Landscape Survey, the Historic American Engineering Record, and the Historic American Building Survey. And that's where most of my work ends up, in the Library of Congress. It's been around since 1933 during the New Deal. It was a way to keep out-of-work architects. I'm not pointing at you for a reason, but
by choice, out-of-work architects.
Employed, yeah. No, it was all these guys in the Depression. It's like all of a sudden architecture wasn't needed. So let's have them go out and document buildings by drawing them and measuring them. The colonial architecture, the adobes, and things like that. In 1934, they started doing photography as well. So teams of architects would go measure buildings. Hey, there's that phone.
For those of you who don't know, that's a phone, a real phone.
It's the 1930s calling.
Right.
Next you'll hear a voicemail pickup, which I will never hear.
Right. Yeah. So also, it's amazing to me the consistency of the quirks of character that I find in photographers, that, just calling me and leaving me a message.
Listen, it's just like yours. It's like, don't leave a message because
I'm not going to check.
I'll see it in 5 seconds.
Right.
And if you leave a message, I'll see it in 2 days when my wife goes, the light's blinking.
Right. To me, I don't hardly even check my cell phone voicemails anymore because it's all telemarketers. So it's like, I just put on there, like, email me or text me. This is going to get lost.
No, I called you the other day and I got that and I'm like, just had to laugh. I'm like, this is me again. So yeah, I mean, we're all.
Well, that's what, like, reading through the couple chapters that I listened to yesterday. Just like yeah, like everything's like firing because I've either been there or been on the other side of it.
I wrote the book for 19-year-olds and realized I've pretty much nailed the 50-year-olds, right? That have been in the business. They're like, yeah, I can relate to that. 19-year-olds don't really want to be discouraged.
Right, but there's 1 or 2% of those 19-year-olds who have the foresight to glean knowledge. Like, I was one of those who always looked to people that were older than I am and really tried to see where they made mistakes and try not to repeat that, where there's other people who, I'm not exactly pointing at you, but people with your personality that have to refine. You want to go through that fire to see what is real and what's not real. Where I'm looking for shortcuts.
Yeah.
So did you by chance listen to the podcast? 2 of them I've done with Carl Ramsdell.
I think I listened to one of them.
Nature photographer, absolute whack job.
Oh, the bird guy.
Yeah.
The owl guy.
Yeah.
I think I did listen to both.
Snake guy, owl guy.
I didn't recognize the name. So it's been a while.
He's an interesting one
because owl guy.
We have I met him through surfing.
Right.
Yeah. And he hung around me and another friend of mine who are both commercial photographers. Never showed any interest in photography at all. And then one day he was just taking a picture of the pier with his phone, and he was like, oh, that was fun, because there was a bird. And then he just got sucked into it. And now if you go to his Instagram, he is good. And when I approached him about it, because he sent me his Instagram, because I didn't even know he was starting it, and I looked at it, and I was like, I told my wife, I leaned over, and I was like, I knew it. He's stealing other people's work. I knew he'd do this. And I called him, and I was like, dude, like, you're offending me. Like,
Right.
you can't do this. It's very wrong of you to do that. You got to stop. Because I'm close enough to him. He's like, those are mine. I took it. Like, they were his. And I just couldn't believe it. He has this insane talent and this drive. Like, he's up at 4 a.m. every day. Yeah. And he just goes and sits for hours and hours and waits. And he has that insane interest, drive, and talent for doing that. He hates the part of turning it into money, though. So it's a weird thing for him. And everything that he does, that he's making a living off of now, he only does it on auto setting on his camera and post-production on his phone. Yeah. That's it. And he's making this new kind of living out of it. And there's, like, most of his clients that buy his photos are women online that see it and think that's an amazing shot. I want it on my wall in my house. Right. He's providing a service for people who like it. He's having a great time. No one's hurt. It's like, but to come from this background of, like, this is so hard to actually think you could try and make a living doing something you enjoy. And then he just breezes in.
It's not intuitive. Stephanie, who I was talking about before, was this fantastic wedding photographer. She also pivoted out of it and then decided, hey, I want to open up a gallery of photography, beautiful photographs that people will buy and put in their house. And I gave her the advice, I was like, what are you, crazy? It's not sustainable. It just won't work. And she and a friend of hers, Steve Munch, they're like, no, we think we want to do this. We tried it on a small scale. People bought a couple things. I'm like, do you know how much rent costs? And then they're like, opened up a studio here in Main Street, and it's totally successful. And the work is beautiful, and she's going, I'm going to go to France and photograph the horses that run through the waves because, those photographs will sell. She's going to go up to Pismo Beach and shoot the monarchs and the trees. And, so she's still working at it. It's not like slapping stuff on the wall, but it's not intuitive. It's not what she went to Brooks for, quote unquote. Right. She went to Brooks during film days, and now she's shooting, digital with Canon. So, there are ways to make it. I think you started this question a while minutes ago. What advice would you give? It's like you can't give advice to get to that end, because she had to get through wedding photography and then shooting celebrity parties in Los Angeles to end up with two photo and find a business partner who was also a photographer to open up a gallery studio that now has a second location in Kauai, and pay that rent and still make money. It's like, wow, how do you put that together, right? And I have this tiny little niche market where I'm one of, 10 guys in America who shoots historic American building survey photography. So if you type into Google architectural photographer, you get 1 million hits. If you type into photographer, historic American building survey photography, or HABS, just the initials, HABS photography, I show up on the first page accidentally without paying for anything because it's just such a small pond. You also, you may not realize it overtly, but I'm thinking you're in a small main pond that you're doing work outside of Maine, but your main pond gets you all those connections and referrals. 100%. And like I was talking about before, we'll call Trent. We need a photo, we'll call Trent. It's not, we need a photo, let's put out a bid for this. Mm-hmm. So I've now gotten to the point in a field which is mostly involved with bids. I still have to occasionally do competitive bids, although I'm usually the highest photographer. And I still get them sometimes because people realize it's
that's
about the deliverable, right?
I always want to lose a job because I'm too high a price.
Yeah.
That's why I want to lose a job.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the middle guy. Definitely don't want to be the cheapest guy. I want to be the guy they want, and it hurts them to pay me as much as they do. Mm-hmm. That's right. I'm not a charity. Like if I'm working for a charity, I'll price myself as a charity, but they should be striving for excellence in their design that is highly, highly valued. And if it's highly valued, it's given
and you're the right guy, right?
An appropriate amount of value in this disembodied form of value called cash, and that's fine. You know,
I go as far as telling people I'm either expensive or free.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
If it's a charity, I'm yours,
and
I'll just eat it. I use it as marketing. I just shot this Neutra house in Silver Lake for a foundation. I'm like, well, you need documentation of this house. I can do a workshop, which will be sort of marketing in my tiny little pond, my tiny little niche. Mm-hmm. People will hear about it. They'll see my name. I can justify the thousands of dollars I'm not getting for that job and all the work I'm going to do in order to get it to the Library of Congress by just putting it on the marketing side of my debits. And then some developer will come along and say, we have this really nice armory that we want to demolish that's historic back when the National Guard was building armories, and we want to do X, Y, and Z to it, take it down and build 5 stories of whatever. It's like, well, guess what? You get to pay the full freight, and hopefully that pays for some of these jobs that aren't, and whether it's a farm. My very first HABS job was a local farm here, an old Victorian house, an old craftsman house, a barn. I didn't really know what historic preservation was. I was working on a house that we're sitting in right now, which is an 1881 farmhouse, where my wife and I have, restored this house and getting into preservation. I go shoot these farms, and then a few weeks later, the farm is gone, and now it's a sports park for the city. And the only remaining thing to show for it is these photographs. And at the time, I didn't know that they were sort of valuable, but now that I'm much more involved in local preservation, it's like, oh shit, these are valuable.
Is it this space right up here?
No. That's a cemetery with 2,000 people in it under the grass.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you start learning about history.
Wow.
That
no
part,
markers.
No, they took them out in the 60s because there were kids smoking pot behind them.
So let them smoke pot.
It was in the 60s. It was run down. It's a Victorian cemetery. So we're talking about this park next to my house, which is Cemetery Park. It's from the 1800s. It's one of those classic parks that you usually see with the little stone stones, but that's not necessarily well taken care of because there was never a way to manage it. So in 1913, they opened a memorial park for perpetual sort of groundskeeping here in town, and that's where all the new burials went.
Right.
And this started to get run down. And the city's idea in the era of urban renewal was let's take out the grave markers and someday we'll mark all the graves, which just never happened. So now it's a park where it's all grass. There's no sports and a lot of dogs. So there's this.
They should do a virtual tour where you can go through your phone and see markers.
Right.
And
yeah, I mean, we have the maps, in this process of becoming involved, like you were sort of pre-involved with architecture before you got into photography. But as I transitioned from weddings that I didn't really care for and watched Stephanie become much better at, realizing, all right, well, I'm never going to get to that level. So I want to do product photography. So I'm going to tell the referred brides that come to me, you know what? I sold all my wedding equipment. They didn't know any better.
Right.
So, it's like shooting with a Hasselblad at that time of my weddings. And now it's like, all right, I'm shooting with a Hasselblad in the studio, on Polaroid and creating these transparencies. And then after about, 10 years of doing that, it's like you said, it's like, I know where to put the softbox. I know how to, I have every sweep color in the world in my studio. I know where to put the side lights. There's almost no product that comes through the door that's really a creative challenge, unless somebody says, I need an illustration of something for a cover or of our brochure or for that makes it look interesting. It's like, all right, now I can start throwing ideas at it and make it creative and go crazy with it.
So that's an interesting.
I transitioned out of that.
That's an interesting situation to outline something that would be nice to discuss, I think, and that's creative burnout. Not that you're, I just don't have anything left to give, but you're losing the inspiration of creativity within the field that you're interacting with. Why does that happen, and how do you avoid that happening, do you think?
I don't know how to avoid it happening. I hate the word, but I have pivoted to use a modern word. So I just sort of adapted and tried to ask myself, where do I want to take the skills that I have, or do I want to abandon them completely and become a old house contractor, or a home inspector, or an appraiser, or something that involves, because we're sitting in an 1881 folk Victorian farmhouse that when my wife and I bought it, the realtor was like, it's a tear down. And I'm like, well, no, it's not really a tear down. So we rebuilt it and fixed it up, and it's now sort of a good example of how to rehab a house. And through that, got involved in historic preservation, and got passionate about a new thing. And so follow the passion. It's like, I didn't know there was any way to be the architectural photographer of historic preservation.
Right.
But apparently there was. I did that first HABS job of that farm that they tore down for the pool. I was like, I got to see if there's more of that out there. Who are the potential clients? Go through that process of sort of business planning, all the while still shooting, bags of rice on a white seamless, because the iPhone wasn't quite out yet and didn't erase that world.
Right.
And so luckily I jumped from that ship to another ship that was still afloat. And I'm not still trying to make a living shooting stuff on a white seamless, because that world's gone, buddy.
Right. Yeah.
So to come back to your idea of creative burnout, I think you have to stay interested. So what's passionate? I mean, it seems like for me, I was doing art on the side, and I realized an interesting sort of phenomenon that as I was shooting studio work for that, let's say, decade of really strong commercial studio work, or go out and shoot a portrait of this person, that my artwork that I was shooting in black and white and on film for myself was locations. I have a section on my website that's personal work. And it's all, sort of roadside Americana, shot in black and white film, in infrared, and then when I sort of refocused and started doing architecture, I started doing a body of work on large format in the studio of still lifes. And I'm like, well, this is interesting. It's sort of the interest on my part is I'm doing art of something that's markedly different from work. Has anybody ever asked you to categorize your podcasting as art?
Well, I see art as an objectification of experience. So yeah, I would consider this art.
Because it's sort of what I see as your, having listened to your stuff and heard some of your sort of mental conundrums. It's like, this is the stuff you do on the side when you're not doing photography, which to you is work. I think you might be in a position where your work is more of more easily burned out because you're treating it more as work.
Yeah. So I began to experience, like up till the beginning of COVID, I was shooting up to anywhere from 2 to occasionally 5 days a week. And a
gnarly.
Full architectural day that I don't know how your architectural days with documenting historical buildings, but on new construction, or there's so much, like the photography part of it is pretty easy from my perspective. It's the styling and the minutia of adjustment within those frames. It's a deeply technical, but also aesthetic processing process.
Mentally exhausting.
Yeah, just huge. And it's not like you have to hit one home run. You have to hit, anywhere between 8 to 20 home runs in that day. And it's so incredibly.
20 runs, you need 3 home runs.
Yeah. that's a good way of putting it, I think. Yeah,
because those three magazine shots that are the lead, right, and the two mains, and then you've got, but the runs need to be strong, right? They need to be doubles to easy extend the metaphor.
Yeah, and so that pressure puts you in a point where if you're not doing that, you're not going to get the work. So I luckily figured out a way and was able to. I think I have a strong combination of technical personality traits that were learned kind of more conservative, like show up on time, comb your hair, make your bed kind of stuff. But then also I have this natural side of me that's very open, and I enjoy intensely being in an unknown situation where you're unprepared and you have to figure it out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, that's like throw me on a boat with most of the gear I need to go around the world. I'd much rather do that than plan it all out and have it go perfectly, right? Mm-hmm. So I figured out how to do that. But for me, because that's the intense enjoyment, once I figure it out, I lose the enjoyment. And I'm at the point now where I know exactly how to do what I do, and I can just walk into a space. This is where we're shooting it from. I don't have to scout a place other than to look at the difficulties that you can't see without being there, which is still very helpful, and that's why I still do it. To get to the point where I know what I'm doing, I've just lost my emotional payment for doing that act of creativity. I'm not being creative anymore, and just technical problem solving.
Exactly.
So then I have to cover the bases with that, because that's why I'm able to pay for stuff and take the winter off. Right. I got to cover that. So then I have to try and tell myself, now that you've gone through, even so, it's not that it's easy that day. It's still extremely difficult, but there isn't the discovery in that day that there used to be. Like, I like discovering the mental process that helps me get there. So now I have to figure out, how do I shift to the next gear while still doing that? And the thing I want to talk to you about, because I think transitioning into the mentoring process is very important at this stage. To continue to do what you are good at and creatively work, to learn more and more deeply about what you do, I think in teaching, as you pointed out, I think that deepens your understanding of what you do and then reinvigorates that creative energy. The second thing I've done to help try and hopefully stave that off is make my process of doing that thing, remove it from being paid for it, and make it more difficult. So I bought the Fuji X100V. It's this limited lens. It's the most boring focal length that I've ever encountered, but it makes you have to actually move around. Well, you can't zoom in and out.
Building constraints to create creativity. The constraint makes you have to solve a different problem. Right. You're going to get bored of that. So.
Right, but the thing I'm doing is I'm actually now taking photographs for fun, where before I was like, I'm not going to take a photograph unless I'm getting paid, so I want my creative energy to be enjoyed there.
Right.
And
that's why you liked when you got the long lens, is that's a whole new world.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. And it's very difficult to make a nice composition when you've got such a narrow field of view.
Right.
Which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
about mentoring, and you've been teaching classes on what you do, and
I used to teach pretty actively at the Los Angeles Center of Photography and the Julia Dean workshops. First doing infrared photography workshops, which was one of those things where I could fill a room instantly with people who were trying to get that, because it was just so hard to figure it out. It was just this weird film. Like you said, it was getting on that boat with half your equipment. It's like, I've got the film and the camera, I'm closing it, I'm going to go out and take pictures, and I have no idea what these pictures are going to look like because I can't see infrared.
Right.
So I might think this is going to be amazing, click, get back, shit. Or go out and say, well, this might be an okay picture, and then it's, amazing, or at least in my brain, it was amazing. But there were some tricks and of the trade that I could definitely give to students, and it's a very energizing. I mentioned it in my book. I didn't make this up because I'm not that smart. The idea of reverse mentoring. So they're teaching you while you're teaching them. It's a two-way street. They're looking usually for some technical understanding and just a hope that this is a viable career, and that there's these that there are ways to make this adapt to their vision, and you're getting out of it that equally. in a different way.
Yeah.
I as far as the burnout of the thing, it's following passion. So maybe if you haven't noticed that you're passionate about something else, start taking some photographs of that, even if it's just for yourself. Technically, podcasting is your release, and
I've
that's
actually
where that goes. It's like,
I've actually found that this medium of creativity, in a way, I really enjoy it because I'm horrible at, and I'm guessing you're the same way. I can't go to like a mixer and like.
No, I as much as I hate people, I am a joiner. Whereas it doesn't sound like from other
So you
podcasts.
could go to like a thing and have to stand there with a drink and make chit chat with people.
Yeah,
That's impressive.
Well, yeah, and because my joke at the deeper level is I hate people, but I like persons. Right.
Right.
So
hate the
once
group,
you're
love
in that
the person.
one, if they're anonymous and on the freeway in front of me in traffic, it's like, oh man. But if you're having a one-on-one conversation, I can empathize with them and find something interesting. Or the nice thing about a mixer is, you know what? I have to talk to them, and walk away. So it, and I think a lot of other photographers. You're an outlier in the fact that you're sort of out there alone in Maine, and you're not looking at Instagram for inspiration. You're not, connecting with other photographers. I think that's actually unusual. Not bad. It's just different, right?
Yeah, I don't get a lot. My whole feed is mostly philosophical and surfing.
Yeah,
mostly.
Which is probably what the feed should be, because social media is supposed to be about interests, right? It's crossed over into this weird marketing world where it's like, well, I have to spend time on this stupid thing because people expect to see a post from me every now and then, and so on and so forth. It's a terrible communication tool, except that in a way it's the purity of advertising. The difference between advertising and marketing is like Budweiser's just putting their name out there, not on a specific product, but it's at a football game. You keep seeing the word Budweiser.
Yeah.
That kind of advertising, that's what Instagram is. It's like, oh, yeah, Schäf posted another thing. I will look at it. If I find it interesting, I will read the caption. Otherwise, it's just swinging by, right? Oddly enough, if your clients are on Instagram, you probably need to be on Instagram. My clients are not tending to be on the newest new thing. Knowing your clients is kind of big. So I have a lot of architectural historians and people. They're usually coming out of university, or they've been in the business for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Some of them aren't even on Instagram because it's just too new, right? So I have to send them my direct mail pieces. And weird thing is nobody sends direct mail pieces anymore. So I'm the only guy that has a postcard tacked up on their cubicle because I'm the only postcard they've ever gotten.
We stopped at the beginning of COVID because no one was in their offices, and that's where we were sending our printed pieces out to. And I don't think we started back up.
But if you've sent printed pieces, you're already an outlier, right? Because and the thing is, somebody once was saying, I don't know where I heard it, they're like you send a piece of mail to an 18-year-old and they go batshit crazy. They've never gotten mail before.
What on earth is this?
They've all, it's like they'll probably throw it away because the only thing they're getting is something off a mailing list with the other 35 pieces of junk mail, right? So you hope they don't just take all the mail and toss it. A thing. But know your client. I got these two for you. These are bumper stickers that you probably won't understand. And it's sort of funny, but if you don't know it says CEQA and ye shall find, right? It's super funny to my clients
HABS,
who know that CEQA is a California Environmental Quality Act. It rhymes with seek, so seek and ye shall find.
Perfect.
They deal with it. They are immersed
It's an inside
in
joke.
It's an inside joke. It's a bumper sticker on my truck that 99% of people don't get. And occasionally I'll have somebody taking a picture of the back of my truck and I'm like,
what's
up?
wrong with
Like, that's a really funny a bumper sticker because I'm in the business.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I have one because this is my bumper sticker, so I will give it to them. So it's like knowing your clientele that well that you can have an inside joke with them is just priceless. It's totally priceless.
Interesting.
To interrupt the flow, I need to hit your restroom.
Yeah, no sweat. That's what.
Sorry.
That's what coffee does, right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to tell you to take your mic off because that could be awkward, but it's there.
Yeah.
All right. What for people like when I started out, I basically knew no one, knew nothing about business, had no clue how to.
You knew Photoshop, right? You knew Photoshop. That was your jam, and then you started knowing.
I knew Photoshop. I had a friend who was a photographer, but then I bought all the gear I needed from buying and selling a foreclosure, and then had to try and turn that into a living. Yeah. And did
you say your wife worked?
Yeah, when I started, we didn't have kids. She was a physical therapist, so I had about 3 years where I could solely focus on starting a photography business, targeting specifically architecture. I would shoot anything.
You mentioned that when you were talking to that architecture student.
Yes. Yeah. Recently.
It's like just went for it, but I wasn't sure what the backdrop is because the thing is, it's like telling him, "Hey, you're gonna make no money for 5 years." It's like, well, it's true, but that's not in everybody's cards, right? It's like you figured out how to work it out. I did a little piece between studio photography and architecture photography, where I was like, I'm going to be an art photographer. It's like, well, that didn't work. So I actually had a failed launch, right? It's like, I also didn't give it enough time to work, right? So it's like, if you want to be an art photographer, it's just like all you ever want to do, right? And I was like, well, I'm still got one foot in the commercial, and I still would like to make a little money. And it's like, that's where, so I've played around with that whole art world. And it was, I love doing it, but a little bit of a disaster. And like, luckily, my wife was paying the freight and willing to go, all right, how's this
still
working?
Recording?
Yeah, I was just making sure you were in frame. I thought
how's this working with, keeping the lights on? Well, she did. So that gave me the luxury to fail miserably.
Right, but those failures are so incredibly valuable.
That's the thing. It's like, that whole failure process, iterative, like, fix it. That's pretty fantastic. Really, it's underrated.
Right.
Super underrated. All right, are we back on?
Oh, we were never off.
Just the flushing toilet in the background. Yeah,
so what was the process? What made you write this book, and how was the process? And what would you suggest? Would you also suggest people don't write or just don't shoot?
No, the funny thing is, so the book was a Kickstarter. So if it failed the Kickstarter, it never needed to be printed. It's like like I said, I'm an optimizer. So it's this hardcover book with these little tiny on high quality paper with this print job that was done at a USA printer. All these things that's like are not necessary. This is a total soft cover book. It probably could just be a PDF, right? I wanted to create a thing, and this is that thing. So what most writers, at least self-published writers, won't tell you is the reason the book existed is because they weren't working.
Right.
I had a lull, and it's like I was starting to do some more and more architecture. The recession, sort of the bubble burst, and I'm like, I have time and the luxury of having a wife that has a job to work on something that will bring in no money. And all books make no money. I mean, I also just recently did a book with Ken Bernstein on preservation in Los Angeles. It's this big, beautiful coffee table book. And, I got couple $1,000s as the book launched, and a couple $500 royalty checks, and I probably spent $3,000 on gas driving around LA to shoot 360 photographs. They're mostly from the sidewalk, so it wasn't like hardcore architecture photography, but these are so super important for me to have that book in my sort of credibility and marketing.
Right.
But no, this book was just sort of, it came out of a list that I originally thought I was going to do this class at the Los Angeles Center of Photography, which was just, hey, here's the 100 tips an old crabby photographer can tell you. And it turned into like, well, I can make this into actual 66 concrete thoughts. And my writing style turned out to be super sarcastic and snarky, and with a little bit of swearing. And I had a really good editor, my friend Paul, and I sent it to him, and he started out saying, "Oh, this is too snarky. Snarky's hard. Don't." And then towards the end, as we got through, he's like, "You know what? You need to be a little more snarky. It either is going to work on this or it's going to fail. Put it on." Kickstarter, sold 250 copies, which was the goal. Sent out 250 copies, sold a few more. But as the Kickstarter was finishing and as the book was getting printed physically in Wisconsin, I got so busy I did no marketing. So like I told you earlier, it's like I've got a bunch of these under the bed because I didn't go out and say, hey, look, here's a book. It relates to students. It relates to, but it old-time photographers will understand it. It talks about, in a sort of a funny way, the way to sort of avoid these pitfalls and to not expect instant success. And I mean, we haven't talked about it. It's called Don't Shoot, 66 Reasons Not to Become a Professional Photographer.
Yeah.
So right from the cover, it's like, it's not about shutter speeds and film tips. It's about you. If you can't handle the truth, you can't take it.
Right.
So
it's the way you've written is the way I think and the way I mistakenly speak too often.
Yeah.
And it offends my wife, and especially when I try and put that harsh reality on my boys to say you're going to need to be tough if you're going to be successful, at least in relating to how the world was when I grew up. I don't know if this new generation, if like their existence will actually be different, and by them being softer people, they'll fit in just like we fit in and we're successful. I don't know. Or if I'm creating monsters that are going to dominate because everyone else is soft. It's hard to read that when you're the older guy in the situation. You don't know what's going to turn out. But like I'm putting all these hard truths constantly on my kids but with love at the same time, telling them, you're not going to be successful. It's going to take a ton of work to get there. Just kind of harsh truth after harsh truth. And my wife's constantly like deflecting these things, trying to, no, hugs. History
repeats itself, so it'll be good for them.
Hard times make.
Well, your parents said if you don't have a degree and you're not a dentist, you're not going to succeed. So I mean, we were doing the same stuff, except your dad probably wasn't introspective.
He was very introspective.
Really?
Yeah.
Was he really thinking about, I wonder what I'm telling Trent that's going to scar him? No.
The interesting thing about my dad is
my dad didn't, but let me put it that way. Car mechanic, worked for himself, just was like, work hard,
very, very
really, really practical. He was a tourist, but I mean, just German work ethic and. His advice to me when I wanted to become a photographer was, in a war, nobody needs a photographer.
You need war correspondents.
And I'm like, ooh, great, all right. Be a baker. People need a dentist. People need a mechanic. He was a mechanic. People need certain things. Photography is not a need.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, but come to find out, there aren't any local wars at the moment, and people do purchase photography, so it is relevant. I just read an interesting I guess an AP Almanac, the guy wrote this story about like being an architecture photographer in Ukraine right now.
Oh, wow.
It's like he's in a war zone. Do people still need that?
It's interesting.
It is interesting because if you're baking bread, you're in demand.
So that's interesting. Like, so Chet's dad, photographer.
Oh.
And I looked up to Chet's dad because Chet's dad, for one, he'd always have like the pet car. He had these cool like replica Porsches and some real Porsches, and then always had these cool cars. He was the guy doing all of our high school photographs, banquet photographs, and then he would find someone broken down on the side of the road, help him, and then they'd sell him the car that was broken down, and he'd just fix it himself and sell it and move on. Yeah. Just would make a living out of being creative and doing it himself. And to me, I was like, if I could, because that's just what I was talking about. Like, that's what I want. I want to get on a boat with half the supplies I need, that I can string them together and make it work. And that's like invigorating, right? But to come from a background like that and still be a photographer, to come from a background like your father and be a photographer, my dad, pastor and then university professor type, but always extremely practical about how to make a living and being very careful with money. He looked at like, you're jumping into a system that has no bureaucratic means of supporting you long term.
Right.
You're going to have to do that on your own, and that's impossible.
But his dad is very kind of soft-hearted and emotional, so he's not the Germanic Einstein Thrive. It's more of, this is the framework he grew up in and what he understands the world, but he's also an open, emotional guy who very quickly learned that it would be fine.
I think the takeaway that I sort of allude to on the first page of the book is, if you don't want this so much that I can't discourage you, the people that do want it, that do want to be, are your competition, and they'll eat your lunch.
Yeah, and that's what my dad told me about being a pastor. He's like, if you don't feel there's nothing else you do because you feel a calling 100% to that, you should not even attempt to do it. And I never felt that drawn to anything, but I'm very deeply philosophical and drawn to that now, but I'd never want to be like a spiritual pastor. So I really enjoyed I do creatively, but there's also now this other part of my life that I get, I think, from my dad, listening to him and who he was, that I like to apply to it.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast has touched on things that are sort of surprising for a podcast with the title. It seems to be about, it goes into areas of philosophy and creativity more than most. And I wasn't sure where that was coming from because I hadn't picked up that your dad was a pastor, but whereas I'm in it's pretty much full atheist mode, and my parents weren't religious, and I'm not asking those deep questions. If you're atheist, you're at least assuming answers to those questions or lack of answers to those questions, and okay with that. I'd like to hear more about So I'm at the point now. I'm just gonna, if I was gonna get buried, it's like worms is the end, right? There's nothing beyond that.
Yeah.
So you better
not guaranteed.
Yeah, you better make this life decent, right?
Right.
Be a good person, right? End of story.
So I'm at the point where when people say God, I translate in my head the interaction of truth and relationship. That at the deepest level of anything, that's all we have. I believe that there's truth outside of us, that we're imbued with the ability to relate, that we then discern more truth out of the chaos as our purpose to push forward. So when people say God, I say the fair balance between truth and relationship in my head. And miraculously, to me, that is an accurate interpretation no matter what you believe. Because the people that do believe in God are essentially saying there is truth, and I've been able to relate to it, and this is what I've found to be that truth. And a lot of times the misstep in religious thinking is to say that this is already obvious, and we've decided it, and we're the only ones who have it. Right. Whereas from an atheist perspective, you can say, okay, so you believe there's a truth, how did you relate to that? It's more so a question of, well, what's the space in between how you related to this truth that you think there is?
Right.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the how rather than the is that you assume.
Right.
And to me, that makes people look at their process. It makes people look at the whys of how they do things or why they do things. That is often a little bit too harsh for a lot of people to look at. So I think the people that tend towards atheism have far more of a character that they can have that snarky approach to say, yeah, this is hard to admit, but we need to look at it and relate to it and make decisions accordingly with knowing that truth, at least what we can.
Yeah, I mean, we're surrounded by hypocrisy, and we can either acknowledge it and say, all right, it's like somewhere between karma and hypocrisy is the fact that it's like, I'm not a big fan of extracting oil, but I drive a car that runs on oil, right? And it's like, all right, and we're surrounded by that, right? It's like Germany, it's like, we're going to stop using nuclear power. Yeah, but because you're using mostly brown coal, right? It's like, yeah, there's a lot of rooftop solar in Germany. It's sort of mind-boggling for a gray country. So there's, I mean, in our politics, in our religion, in just daily life, if the easiest thing that, without thinking about it too hard, is just like, it's sort of like karma, right? Karma's easy. There's ins, there's outs. It's like a bank account. You don't want to debit too much, and apparently under the karma approach, it's like if you have a really good bank account when you die, then you come back as something even better. Whatever.
Come back as fertilizer, and
as long as you're not using it as like, well, I have such a good karma balance, I can be a dickhead now for this one big thing.
Gaming the system of karma. Use karma.
I'm keep building this up so I can murder somebody someday, and I'm still even, right? It's like, that's pretty horrible. Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see where your podcast goes, but I mean, if you think too hard about this and talk too long about this, you could start a cult, and that could be your next.
Well,
next
no,
world.
I've considered that.
We have a friend who's working on it.
Oh, shit.
Which one, Star?
Yeah.
No, I've talked to Everett about it a lot.
It's a very hedonistic one, but
we have his cousin, my friend. He has close people, and we'll leave them nameless, but close people in his life that have extreme conspiratorial bents, and then he and I start talking about our past common religion, like, why don't we just start a cult? Because it could be pretty, But that just descends into taking people's money and sleeping with your cult members' wives, and that's not where I want to go. So,
that's good.
Yeah,
that's positive.
Upstanding character.
I guess you can put that on the karma side of the deposit side of the karma bank. Yeah.
So back to photography.
Nice.
No, like there's
nice
I
pivot.
Because like similar age group, etc. You get a lot of
53.
I'm 49, and kids come to me and they say, I want to do what you do. How do I go about it? And
I tell them not to go to photo school and to study what they are actually interested in, because that's been my path to success.
I ask them what kind of person they are. I know people like myself. I was not driven I didn't get any drive until I was 25, and I was already done with school.
Right.
So I needed that time between 18 and 24 to kind of get my brain to catch up to the world around me, to realize the patterns in life, etc. And then college was a really good route for me. I didn't go Brooks or RIT or anything like that. I went to a Christian school that had very small classes, very well equipped, good teachers with good experience.
Photo school, university photo school.
It did not teach anything about competition. It didn't teach anything about bidding. When I got to LA,
business is lacking in all of the art programs.
When I got to LA in 2003, if you weren't Art Center or Brooks, good luck getting an ad, an audience with anybody in the ad world.
Right.
It was a good old photographers club. So now when people come to me and say, should I go to photo school? I'm like, well, for one, good luck finding one.
Yeah.
For two, if you know the style you want to do, then just go after it. Like, you can learn the technical part on YouTube. and practice, and you'll be refined through that fire. But if you don't know exactly what you want to do, you just know that you want to be in this creative industry, assist an architectural guy, a still life guy, a fashion guy or girl, or whatever. Just go through that. What's like? I mean, I kind of got the sense you have. It's the driven. Usually, the driven people are the successful people, but there are outliers like myself who I'm not that driven in compared to Trent, but I've been successful.
I assisted. I got fired by the local photographer who was sort of the big shot at the time because I was a terrible assistant because I wanted to look through the camera and he wanted me just to paint the cove, right? It's like, all right, I don't want to be here. It's like, go out and buy a soccer ball. It's like, I'm going shopping. It's like, well, we need a soccer ball for the shot. Somebody's got to buy it. It's not going to be the photographer, right? And you have no business looking through the camera. So I
had to go look for a pregnant woman for an NIH shoot, and like a 20-some years old, going through malls looking for pregnant women.
Excuse me. That's awkward. Yeah. It's like, I'm not a stalker.
Right.
Yeah. I assisted a couple of people and realized I got a little bit of business there. I've been super open when I talk to people about sort of the business end of it because there's very few places to get that information.
Yeah.
And to give Brooks credit, the 2 years that I was at Brooks was this really intense photographic education. So it's not like when I say I'm an art school dropout, it's a little jokey. I wasn't there that last year to get that degree. The first 2 years were critical. The last year is building your portfolio, technically at whether you're at Art Center or a place like that. I got out, had built while I was there, and soon thereafter a beautiful laminated portfolio box because there were no iPads and no screens. You couldn't email anything. That I would knock on doors and say, "Who's your marketing director?" And if I got at their desk, they could open it up and look at my photographs. And occasionally, I got a job. And then when I got a job, I would take out one of my laminated pieces that I had created to look like a job and put in the tear sheet from the actual brochure to give me credibility. And after a while, like I said, those clients started calling me. So there are people that respond really well in that university atmosphere. And so for those people, the perfect direction is college. And there are people that don't. There are visual people and non-visual people and people that are good at math and people that aren't. So I think it's specific to the learner and touching, doing an assisting job and finding out you're a terrible assistant, and then eventually having a job where you're hiring assistants and saying, some of these guys suck. And some of these guys are uber assistants. I mean, Dave Sanchez was one of my assistants. He was one of my students when I was teaching at Ventura College. And he got out, started assisting for other people. And every time I needed somebody who was, like on it, he brought to the table more information than I had. So there was a point he was teaching me. It's like, this is how we put gels on lights, dude. It's like, this is how you fold the gaff tape. I'm like, wow, duh.
I've been working with the same assistant almost my entire career. He's incredibly talented as a photographer. He suffers from being way too creatively minded and intelligent towards that creativity and thirst for information. And if he would put the drive into getting himself out there, I think he'd make an incredible fine art photographer if he'd just I think if I could hire him to just go produce art, I could make him successful. But like you're saying, it's like I think I had the cover of a magazine before I understood anything really about the technical controls of a camera.
Yeah, I think you mentioned on one of your podcasts that you got a lucky break.
Yeah, it's like
sometimes that's
it happened. I had a background of a friend who went to school, who taught me a huge amount of like, all right, here's your toe in the water of the technical stuff. Don't do these things. As far as assisting, what are the top 5 things that like make an assistant amazing for people who are listening to this that are going to be assisting?
Well, you know what? The trick is the Uber assistants didn't start out as first assistants. They started out at fourth assistants, and then they spent enough years in it to get to the point where it's like now they know anything you can throw them at them, and they're ready to be up for 12 hours. You know, getting the gear from point A to point B and renting the cars and doing whatever. Right. Yeah. So that's a lot of commitment to assisting. Yeah. And when you first get in, like I was fourth assistant and didn't want to go buy the soccer ball, so I never got to second assistant. But I saw, that happening all around me. I saw these guys that were, they were pretty much studio managers. In one case, one of them bought the studio from the previous photographer. So, yeah. How do you do that? I mean, you shut up and be a sponge. That's one thing. I mean, I did have some assistants over time that I couldn't hire the second time because they just didn't shut up. I put that in my book. It's like, you can't be talking to the client when I need stuff, right? Right. Because you shouldn't be talking to the client anyway. That's my job, right? Right. Because in case you say something stupid, it's my ass. Right. And potentially my reputation and I'm getting the vibe that you're shopping for clients and they're my clients. So that's not exactly a good vibe to be putting out. So, I mean, understand the caste system in assisting in that, the fourth assistant cleans the toilets and the third assistant, is in charge of making sure lunch gets there, and the second and first assistants are the photographer's right and left hands, right? And later on, the photographers are going out on the job with one assistant. They're not going out with the fourth. Right. They're going out with the first, right? So the sweet jobs are not happening.
Just presence too. Like presence. I can tell an assistant's not going to work for me very much longer when you can see them wandering off in their brain. And when I have the camera in my hand, you need to be my eyes that are over there. Yeah. And occasionally I had kind of a friend assist me for a bit, and you could just tell as soon as the shooting started, his brain would shut down. I'm like, dude, I need to know that light's not firing.
Now is the time that you need to turn on.
This is when we're, right. Yeah, and just keeping, so some people can assist forever, like his guy. Other people there's a window of opportunity where you're still learning, you're still engaged because you're interested in what's happening on set. But as soon as you reach that point of where you're drifting off, that might be the time for you to jump and try get your toe out there and become the photographer yourself, because there are people who detract from the set if they're not present.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
My assistant Corey is so close to actual OCD, like he's never left or misplaced a single thing. In the one or two times I've assisted, I've forgotten batteries. I've messed up because I didn't go through the normal rungs. I went straight from being a master's level educated architect to, I called a portrait guy, the only photo studio I ever saw in Maine. I was like, hey, do you need an assistant? And, he's, and this is the kind of guy who had his, like windbreaker jackets with portraits by Deb or whatever, and now I look back on it and he's like, I'm all set. You hack.
Well, here's the thing. It's like, I actually, I think I mentioned this in the book also. It's like, I've never had an assistant cold call me twice. Yeah. It's like, every time they cold call me and say, hey, or now it's cold email me, and which is even easier. I'll say, hey, look, call me back in 6 weeks. Because it's just a test. First of all, if you don't call me back in 6 weeks, I can delete your email. And secondly, if you do call me back in 6 weeks, you're at a different level than the 400 people who have called me once. Right. So you've already sort of passed the first hurdle. It sounds so stupid, but it's like if you call that photographer once, why? It's like, all right, you don't want it. Right, I've got 4 guys that do want it more, and the first assistant who doesn't need any help, right? Again, it's a passion thing, right? If you're passionate enough about it, you'll just say, all right, I'm going to put this on my calendar and email him back in 6 weeks. And I'm surprised. It's happened once or twice, but rarely. And then I'll say, hey, let's meet for coffee. And then you can't put that together. It's like, all right, I'm not going to be able to call you and say, I got to shoot next Wednesday. And you're going to go, well, I already have my job. Like, well, if you have your job and your job is fixed 9 to 5, that's where I'm shooting. So either you're going to take a day off and you can do that and not get fired, or you shouldn't be asking about assisting, right?
Right.
So it's a tricky thing to assist because you have to be flexible enough to drop everything.
Right.
And then,
how do you do that?
As a new assistant, what I want to tell people is you are there to relieve the physical stresses of a photo shoot, at least in my work.
Yeah.
Like
what kind of stuff do you shoot? Also architecture?
Healthcare.
Oh,
mostly healthcare advertising.
Okay.
I started shooting. I assisted in fashion and then moved to DC. It was all editorial back when Time and Newsweek were a thing. And then I moved out here and just kind of fell into healthcare advertising. And what I didn't get when I was assisting, what I didn't get at the end of the day, the photographer would look exhausted but hadn't lifted a finger, and I didn't understand that as an assistant. And now I really, it's constant problem solving. And for some people that's exhausting. For me, I'm a little on the introverted side, but because I shoot people, I'm shooting kids, and very rarely am I shooting professional models. It's usually success stories of someone's cancer recovery or something like that.
Right.
I have to be bubbly. I have to be, trying to get the people to show personality.
Sounds terrible.
It is.
I've assisted him once or twice and almost ruined his shoots, but to see what he does, and the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, this would be so much more fun. And the second or third time, I was like, hell no.
It's very
I can't do that.
When I have an architectural shoot, once I still do a little bit. After about the third one, if I do 3 and done in a month or two, it's so easy from that. From like once your brain starts thinking in terms of that. But when yesterday I downloaded 11,000 pictures that I have to go through by Monday. That he and the way his workflow is, I do all my own stuff foolishly.
I do too.
Yeah.
When you said you have a guy, I'm like, man, I wish I had a guy.
I have the best guy.
The best guy.
The best guy ever, Tim Holt.
No, I'm too much of a control freak. So,
do you feel like I can see where that's brought me down? Like I can see where that's not been a good thing, especially watching him blossom. Do you feel like, are you happy with that arrangement still? Because I can't do it from it's like a core level of I can't give up that control.
See, I found someone who's better than me. Right. So I absolutely insist that the feel is right.
Oh yeah, no,
but he's so much better than I could do.
There are people out there that are way better than me, but it's like I don't have the need to find them. Because like I said, I'm doing this film work. I do a little bit of commercial architecture, which is why I have, the top of the line Canon, even though nobody cares if I was shooting it on an old D300.
Right.
To me, it's like, I have to actually get it right on film. There is no retouching. This is one of the things I want to talk to you about before.
Do you still shoot film?
I have to shoot film.
You have to shoot
on
film.
4x5 and 5x7 large format.
Follow-up question: they still make new Canon film cameras?
No, it's not Canon. It's a large format.
Oh, okay. I thought you just said Canon. So.
No, so I shoot obviously always digital alongside, and so the stuff that's on Instagram or the stuff that's on the website is either a scan of the film, which means it has the film borders in it, or it is the shot that was taken from the same tripod, where I can basically click the two cameras on the same tripod, and then drop out the color out of the raw file and say this is a representative sample of what is on film. Because usually my clients need to know what views I took. In my world, we call them views. Right? It's like, this is a job. I need 15 views of this site. All right, I go out there. I've never been able to shoot more than 31 views in a day. That was about an 11-hour day in a 1 million square foot Lockheed Martin facility where they designed the Scud, literally. But that's a grueling day of lifting a 27-pound camera and walking 10 miles inside a building, but every photograph has to be honest. There's no retouching, right? So it's a super challenge, right? If you suddenly did a HABS job First of all, you'd have to
I couldn't
learn
I've
large
never
format,
shot with film.
right? But you could learn that.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, but then it's like, all right, there's not going to be any retouching, right?
Yeah.
It's like if I want to darken that area, I got to use a graduated filter because the negative gets delivered to the Library of Congress, and so I can make the print that I'm sending along with it look a little better by bringing in a graduated filter or something like that in Lightroom, but the negative is, other than that dodging and burning, I can't go, oh shit, I should have taken out that cigarette butt.
Right.
I have to go physically take out the cigarette butt. So I'm looking at the scene saying, are my cameras set up? What flaws are either confusing or misleading? It's something that I can, what I call analog Photoshop, go and move, right? It's like, and I am not moving to use an analogy from our world, I'm not moving the fruit bowl in front of the outlet on the backsplash. I'm moving the fruit bowl out of the way so that I can see the outlet and the backsplash and everything, because I'm documenting the real building.
Right.
And maybe somebody wants to know in 500 years.
What type of plugs did they use?
What type of plugs did they use? How many were in a kitchen? It's like, I just shot this Neutra house, the reunion house in Silver Lake, and the kitchen materials are super relevant. So I have to talk to the architectural historian and say, all right, what's the story about this kitchen? And they're like, well, you know what? These tiles were leftover tiles from the VDL house, and then they were used in the countertop of this house. It's like they just look like black mosaic tiles, but now they're a little bit more important. So it's like I'm going to raise my camera another 6 inches so that I make sure that you can see that, and turn my polarizer so the sheen off the tiles is showing that they're only half an inch by an inch, right? It's an unusual size black tile, and it's a weird countertop. It's like, why does that matter? Well, because I talked to somebody and they told me it matters. So that's how geeky I have gotten into architectural history. So it's like I'm asking, all right, is this room original? Did this change? There's this weird sort of glass box built on the back of this Neutra house. Well, yeah, that was built in the 80s for an extra closet, and we're probably going to remove that. Well, so if it was built in the 80s, it's not historic. I normally wouldn't shoot it, but it's on a Neutra house designed by a Neutra, Dion Neutra, not Richard Neutra. So it's like, I'm now going to shoot it because it might get removed, right? And somebody 500 years ago is going to say, well, what were the alterations while Dion was living in the house? So it's like understanding an entire house that hasn't just been completed by an architect, right? Where you can walk around with the architect. All my architects are dead. It's like, and I'm going to be dead by the time an academic looks at these photographs, so they can't even ask me, is this 1957 Chevy that happens to be parked in front of the building, is this shot in 1957? So it's like I have to avoid misleading people, right? It's like I can have a 2019 Honda in front of a building because people are asking me, oh, can you have a car on the street? I'm like, I don't care about cars as long as they're not blocking anything. Right. As long as the cars are appropriate, right? So I'm overthinking things.
When you submit to the Library of Congress, is there any written thing that comes from your brain, or
yeah, there's a set of captions that are now keyword searchable, so they have to be pretty they used to use captions of front facade, rear facade, and now I try to put as much information into the captions as possible. And then it comes along with a whole narrative report that's written by an architectural historian that tells why the building's significant, when it was built, what's the period of significance, what are the character defining features, all of these buzzwords in the preservation world. And then if it's the full Monty, there's 3 layers of HABS and HAER and HALS photography. There's level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1 is extensive photographs, a full report, and then measured drawings, which are done by architects either measuring the building or laser scans, and then those are transferred onto paper so that they can be archived. Level 2 is usually just a floor plan, base floor plan and photography, and level 1 is just photography, so the basic, and there's a 27-page PDF online of how you should do this photography, and another 27-page PDF online from the National Park Service, who administers this, because this is how you should write the report, and another one about how you should do the measured drawings. And So there's a whole lot of rules. You can only use Arial or Times in your captions, and they have to be formatted in this certain way. It's like I know them by heart now, but the first one I did, I was like, holy crap!
Got to look this up. Got to look that up.
Yeah, technically, the first HABS job I did, I had to type in HABS into Google. What the hell is it, right? Because nobody knows it now. You know, I'm one of the guys that teaches about HABS, and to your end, I've stopped teaching infrared because nobody makes the film anymore. I've stopped really teaching architectural photography because I'm not in the middle of it, right? I've started teaching about this type of historic building documentation.
I'd like to ask you how you got into teaching it, because I had the opportunity to start to do that this spring, but the university that it would be through just had some complications and it's not happening. But it's something likely in my future. So I want to talk to you more about that. Before we leave the stuff from assistants too much, I want to hear the worst horror story from each of you, and then I'll share mine. Of like worst thing assistant. Leave them nameless, but like both horrible thing maybe that happened to an assistant, but also if it's me, the worst thing you've had an assistant do.
$300 worth of batteries on the very first shooting.
Ever did the same thing to me. Yeah. But so yeah, go ahead.
Wait a minute, it was supposed to be nameless.
Oh yeah, wow.
We'll name Everett every time. You'd have to
you
know
first.
And these are cautionary tales to the people listening.
Yeah, so this is self-assisting. This is something that can happen.
Wait a minute, self-assisting?
Yeah. This is a cautionary tale. The thing that was the most like where I thought I was dead on set was my very first healthcare shoot ever. I went into a scenario where the marketing person at the hospital wanted me to photograph. I think it was an angioplasty, and it was an actual. That was happening. There was a live person having it happen to them. She had not communicated to the doctor that I was coming. Doctor was super pissed. Doctor pulled me aside and said, you know, basically I'm going to be an a-hole right now to this woman. It's nothing to do with you. He kind of like softened it a little bit, and then
to the person that hired you to come in.
He went direct. No, the doctor pulled me aside real quick and just said, "Hey,
it's not about
this
you.
is not about you. This is about her." And he just went on anyway. So it was already tense. I go in there and he's like, "You have 5 minutes, go." And so I'm like, and I had a couple Paul C. Buff White Lightnings I'm putting up, and I'm shooting. I think this was film. Yeah, it was film. I'm shooting real quick, and then he's like, "You're done," and it was like 2 minutes in. And so I went to unplug one of my lights, and I unplugged his monitor for his angioplasty that he was doing, and it just goes dark. And I'm like, I'm dead. I'm going to be sued. All these things go through my head. So.
We did that too.
Yeah, well, that's another story too. That's a cautionary tale of when be self enough aware that when you're in something that's like surgery is very, very, very important. This is this person's life and life. Now, granted, it wasn't something. It ended up fine. He, actually laughed about it later, much later. But it's read the room. That's something that assistants that I want to say over and over again. Read the room. There's a time to joke around and be. Fun, funny, or inappropriate even sometimes, depending on like if it's a week-long shoot, we're dining together, whatever. There's times for joking around, but you need to read the room when things become serious, when the camera's up, when the person is, telling an emotional tale. Don't be like, I don't want to ever see you flipping through your phone, really, but read the room.
Problem is, I'll get that towards Corey occasionally. My assistant will be like, "Why are you on your phone?" And I'd get all like, "You should be on your phone." And then a minute later, he's like, "All right, I found out what we need," And I'm just like, "Oh, I was being judgmental. All right, sorry." So but he and I were shooting a proton accelerator.
Yeah, so we were shooting in the middle days of nuclear medicine. They had this thing called a proton treatment. It was mostly for tumors. They could, without getting too detailed, a small aperture of amount of radiation. They could pinpoint exactly where it was.
They crossed two beams, right?
Yeah. And so Trent was assisting me on this, and the guy who had invented this proton accelerator, which was in the deep, deep, darkest basements of a hospital.
Huge
we were shooting that, and so because of that experience with pulling that monitor out, I went to the head technical guy, the physicist, and I was like, "What plugs can we use?" We're shooting architectural. We were shooting with
little RE hot lights,
1,000-watt
total
hot lights. Yeah,
the rectangular ones.
Yeah, and we also had some RE, whatever they are, Fresnels, but. I was like, we have 1,000-watt lights. What can we plug in and not plug into? Because occasionally we'll blow a circuit. And he's like, oh, any of the households you can use, anything. And so we're like, okay, cool. So I plug in, or Trent plugs in a bunch of stuff, shooting along, and all of a sudden a siren goes off, like a submarine's like diving, starts going off. The light goes dark and farther, and all of a sudden, all the clinical people come running out of their rooms, going,
and the patients. Remember
and
that?
Patients being like, zapped by this.
So it was all like men our age
Yeah.
in gowns that had prostate cancer, all of a sudden wandering through the halls because their treatment can't go on because we shut down the proton accelerator.
And so again, I'm thinking all the blood's left me, and I'm like, I'm dead. This is the end. I've hurt somebody, whatever. The physicist came to me and he actually thanked me. He's like, you exposed a flaw in our electrical system. This should not be attached. There should be no. There should be nothing from here to there, and you've exposed that. And he's like, he's like, nothing bad's happened to the people. They're fine. It just shut it down. Yeah. That's all. We'll have to, it takes like an hour to start the machine back up. So he was pretty stoked about that. And I would thought.
But boy, we were scared at first.
Yeah, we were.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, those are two tales that are kind of assistant related, but.
All right.
I have a great assistant now who is older than I am and an ex-contractor and is just on it, and he keeps telling me, it's like, I like assisting for you because I don't have. He used to run a crew of contractors and have all the responsibility, and he's just like, now my only responsibility is to do what you tell me.
Yeah.
So it's like, real, I don't have to worry about the planning. I don't have to figure out all the stuff ahead of time. It's like, I tell people, like, I'm photo shoot. This is the day I show up, but I've already got days of what's going in the car, loading the truck. It's all this pre-production, all this sort of mental problem solving that happened that already has drained me for a couple of days before I arrive on site. Then we do the thing. At the end of the day, I'm drained because it's a 4-day release. I'm like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Then I have a tiny bit of anxiety when I go to the next step, which is developing the film in case something could go wrong because there's actual chemicals hitting pieces of film, and those pieces of film got sensitized at Ilford in England.
Right.
And I'm hoping whenever I buy a box that they look good and there's no flaws on them. And I split the processing into 2 parts in case the machine goes down in the first run and all these things. So assisting wise, I would say that over the years, most of my assisting issues have been in the studio, and they have been personality issues. I haven't had any just big disasters. I haven't dropped I joke about the softbox flying in the pool.
Just thinking about
it because softboxes are tents, right? It's their sails, and I used to have a shoot for Leslie's Pool Supplies, so it was like, all right, today we're doing pool floats, and tomorrow we're doing chlorine. And it's like, not as sexy as it sounds. But yeah, it's just people that don't understand. It's that aren't in that I'm the assistant today. So it's like, well, that is your task. Your task is not to be the photographer. And the reason I was a shitty assistant was because I wanted to be the photographer and wasn't wasn't focused on, no, your job today is to clean the toilets. Not that would never hire somebody to do that, but it's like, all right, if I'm hiring you to be here and take care of all the things and make sure that the clients are happy, that doesn't mean that I still don't need to be the primary communicator with those clients. That doesn't mean, just because you're making coffee and asking them if they want cream and sugar doesn't mean that I need to interrupt you to ask the client if they want a red or a green gel. That's awkward. It's super subtle and tiny, but it's like, excuse me, assistant, I need to actually, you're distracting the client from something where they should have input, right? If you're, in my world, I was working with art directors, the AD, which, you know, and the ADs were giving me input over my shoulder as we were doing tabletops, or we were, you know, arranging all the employees from Kinko's in their aprons, and we shoot, you know, every Kinko's employee, because Kinko's headquarters used to be here in Ventura at one point before they got bought out by FedEx, and I did all of their marketing stuff. You know, it's like I've shot every, you know, people hanging with foam core and people with stacks, reams of paper, and, you know, it's like all the copy background stuff that was the marketing in the stores, the POP stuff. That was my bread and butter, and it all came through my studio, and somebody had to look. It was somebody else's job to look and say, oh, you know, there's a wrinkle on that apron, on that blue apron. Let's fix it, because I am looking at other things, right? So in certain situations, this is totally off topic now, but it's sort of photographically related. It's like I need the interior designer to worry about where the vase is going to go, and if she moves it to a place that's bad, I can interact with her. But otherwise, I don't want to come out of the other end and have somebody say, oh, you should have moved that vase. And the same thing in product photography. It's like somebody needs to be on wrinkles, somebody needs to be on hair and makeup. I am, you know, figuring out how the light works. And that has translated into my current job as to I have to be focused on what's inside the frame of the 4x5 camera, exposing the film and setting the shutter speeds and all of those manual things and making sure the focus is locked on. And then there is, I don't know if you have this problem of being not able to multitask, but then there's a whole set of field notes that needs to happen at the same time. Like, all right, compass direction, description of the shot, what number shot is it? You know, what's the camera height and all these things, and that all gets written onto a clipboard. And I found that when I'm shooting, I'm in one brain, left, right, whatever that is. And if I switch to write something or put it on the map, we're also making key maps of where each shot was, I forget something like stopping down the 4x5 lens. Or, you know, it's like if I go back and forth, it's slow and it's really distracting. So Guy, my current assistant, is like, no, I'm writing all this stuff down, and he's looking to make sure that we're not getting mugged. We just did a 5 or 6 day job on Market Street in San Francisco. You know, now we're in orange vests, so we don't look like tourists, and I have a camera that doesn't look like it's, you know, really a camera. It's this big thing with bellows and stuff like that.
Hard to run with that.
We're still being really careful. And then I decided, you know what we're going to do is we're going to deploy with a 600-pound 400-pound rolling cart that's going to be really hard to run with, right? So it's like, so we were going down 3 miles of Market Street, basically between the ferry building and the freeway off ramp, 3 miles up, just basically slowly documenting. It took days and days, but it was you know, it's a great job. And the first time I've ever had basically a not the first time, but it's like, these are 5-figure contracts, right? So I'm like, all right, you guys are paying me this much up front, and then everything, as the tasks go on, I will be sending you invoices, you know, and I'm not afraid to have a long talk at the very beginning of the contract and saying, hey, look, I know your contract says that you will be paying me 60 days after you get paid from your client. In that case, your client is Public Works, and Public Works is notorious for not paying for 9 months. And I can't do it. So either you change your client, you know, you're a multi-million-dollar corporation that's hired me to do this tiny little piece, and I'm a one-man shop.
Right.
I'm not going to be billing you hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm going to be billing you a few $1,000s, but that is my cash flow. So let's change the contract to say you need to pay me 60 days after I send you the invoice. No matter what. And then I spend a month going back and forth with contracts, but they eventually, you know, we had this agreement. And so I'm paid before other people who haven't made that contract issue. And then I used to do the same thing with Kinko's. At one point, Kinko's here in town said, well, here's the photo contract we want you to sign. And I'm like, well, it says work for hire, so I'm not going to sign that. But I think we can get to a place where I know what you want, which is full use without having to call me in 10 years if you want to use this photo down the road. And I'm willing to integrate that into my contract and go through it with your lawyers over the next few weeks to make it so, or you can find another photographer. Being able to say no is pretty huge in that negotiation.
Oh yeah.
If you can't say no, then it's not going to happen. But it's like, so at the Getty, I've gone back and forth with the legal team to rewrite the Getty's contracts. I've done it with Kinko's. I've done it with big corporations. You just, at some point, you just have to say, look, the contract is a starting point. And if you just want a lifetime of use, that doesn't mean you need to own the copyright.
Right.
And if you do need to own the copyright, that's fine. We'll just double the invoice. But you probably don't want to pay double the invoice. So it's like, how do we play this game?
Right. That's one of the hardest things to do, because you're in such, especially a photographer first time interacting with that. And then to be making a living at what you dreamed you could do, and then say, I just get to do what I enjoy, so just don't worry about this. Take the money, it's your opportunity. There's so many things in there that would make you make the wrong decision for the long-term success. That's so difficult to avoid.
Yeah, and you can't fall on your sword, or you can't, afford these things in your first couple of years. And occasionally you're going to do things for free. Everybody's like, don't work for free. It's like, well, don't absolutely work for free when it gives you access or some other intangible, right? Oh, the tear sheet you'll need to get tons of these other jobs, or the contact that you need. It's like, you can't do it often, but you absolutely need to use that work for free thing to your advantage, And so, there's tons of advice out there swirling. It's not all good advice.
There's the business side, dealing with contracts, etc. Where did you pull from? Was it just years of going through it, or were people feeding you? Were you talking to other photographers?
I would used to go to workshops at Photo New York and Photo LA and ASMP things. Like I said, I'm a more of a joiner than you. So in those spheres, people were talking about it, and everybody's always saying, "Well, you never do a work for hire job." And I'm like, "Well, never say never," but I've been able to never do a work for hire job. I've been able to say, "Hey, look, if I'd rather do these works in the public domain than have you own my copyright."
Right.
Then everybody owns a copyright. And I've done some of those jobs. And I've done jobs where I had a HABS job where I did it for a client on it, because they called me and said, "Oh my gosh, last minute, can you do this?" I'm like, "Well, I can't do it next week," because that was their idea of last minute, "but I can do it tomorrow because I don't have a job tomorrow."
Right.
It's like that weird thing.
I'll offer people a discount if they say, "Well, give me a month to do it, and it'll take a half day." Sure. Yeah. But if you want me to do it next week at that time.
Well, this was sort of a really good client. Done a lot of other jobs for it. This was a client. Obviously, I'm always working for these big conglomerates now, these environmental firms. And it was like, "Oh my God, something's happening. It's out of order. Can you go down and document this building that's being demolished in the next week?" I'm like, "I can do it tomorrow, but I can't do it next week. If I do it tomorrow, that means we'll have to deal with all the contracting later." And so I shot it, got them out of the bind, and then the contract came through, and I said, "Well, I can't sign this because it's got this, the county of Los Angeles owns this. I'm not going to sign it." They're like, "Well," I'm like, "That's fine. I mean, I'll own the photographs. I'll just put them in the public domain," which I did. And they just kept going. I said, "Find another photographer." It's like, it's not my problem. I did you a favor by showing up and documenting this thing. The fact that I'm fine. Just don't pay me, right? It's like I said before, it's like, it's either expensive or free.
Right.
I can't give it to you cheaper, and I'm not going to sign a contract that I wouldn't have signed if we had a month to go over it.
Right.
I'm sorry that, you were in a bind and didn't find a photographer who would sign it. The building, oddly enough, wasn't demolished that next day, and so they could have had somebody go back and shoot it, but they just got sort of in this contractual mess where they're like, "No, you must sign this contract." So I'm like, "No, it's not going to happen." So I put the photos in the public domain, and now I've sent them to the Library of Congress. And in the end, they said, "Well, can we buy a set of negatives for you to fulfill our needs?" I'm like, "Yeah, as long as you realize they're in the public domain." So the contract that you sent me that said is unchangeable is moot. Yeah, that's fine. So they bought the negatives. I sent them a set of the negatives, which normally I then make scans and make prints in the whole 9 yards. And so they had them, and they were going to go through all the process to get to their end goal. And 4 months later, they call me. It's like, can we send you the negatives back to scan them and make prints? They ended up paying me way more for the entire contract in the end because it was just they couldn't get out of their own way.
So I have a few examples of things I'm really appreciative for of my current or my really only assistant I've ever had. But in finding that assistant, I worked with this other assistant that I shared a studio with a guy, Irvin Serrano, who went to Brooks here, ended up out in Maine, I think mostly because of a girl he married. I learned a huge amount from Irvin. He's a really talented portrait photographer. But we were sharing a studio, and he used this guy who was actually from San Diego, who surfed and looked like he could be my cousin. And I was like, oh, I'd probably get along really well with that guy. The personal dynamics between this assistant guy that Irvin had used was just, he creeped me out. And I couldn't put a single finger on anything other than, just in general, the guy creeped me out. I don't know why. So at the end of the shoot, we get back, we unload all the stuff out of the car, we get all the stuff into the studio. We used to get a lot of gear out into the car and back and forth, in and out of studio all the time. I've since just bought a car dedicated to hold that stuff because it's such a pain at the end of the day. Yeah. So we load all the stuff back in. I go to use the bathroom, and I come back, and there's an odd air in the studio. Irvin and this other assistant were there, and I was just like, that's weird. And so the guy leaves, and I'm sitting there talking to Irvin, and Irvin comes over, and he's like, I came over, and the guy's sitting there going through all of your invoices. And like, as I was gone, the guy's just looking at my desk, and I had a pile of invoices that were to go out or something. And he just started going through them. And I was like, are you serious? He's like, yeah, I had to say something to him. And so Irvin is a friend of mine. We had a little bit of falling out because of some other stuff with studio management, blah, 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 that was mostly my fault. But, he, stood up and he's like, you shouldn't be doing that. I mean, how can an assistant not know? Like, that's personal business stuff that you just don't start to leaf through.
I'd be curious to see your invoices too. So, I mean...
Yeah, but you know enough to just
I
ask.
I would know not to do it. In fact, I would look at them and go, I'm not supposed to see that.
Right.
But, everybody's morals are different. It's not that not that I wouldn't want to, right? So it's like just, there's a curiosity, and if the vibe doesn't work, the vibe's super important, right? And that's
you spend so much time with an assistant outside from shooting that if you can't communicate and get along and find interest in each other, then you're going to get to the point where you're like, I don't want to spend more time around that person.
Especially the way you shoot all over the Northeast.
Yeah.
You guys are in cars all the time.
All the time. So
I drive 1.5 miles to my major client. So
that's nice.
But that can still take you 20 minutes in LA.
Yeah, in LA. The nice thing with Corey is that by an end of a shoot, my energy is starting to and he's the kind of guy who will stay up till about 4 a.m. every night, like looking at stuff on the internet. And he's a night owl. And so by the end of the day...
Are you a morning person?
No. But at the end of a shoot...
Which is interesting. It's like being an architectural photographer and not being a morning person. I mean, I sort of like the idea that there is a large part of my business that I can do after the emails settle down. I mean, I don't really answer my phone, so as we've already discussed, so it's not like I'm getting a lot of phone calls, but it's like there's just a lot of daytime stimulus. And so I go upstairs. I have my studio upstairs here at 5, 6 o'clock, and I'll work till 1 or 2, and that's my peak time. So that there's a perk that people don't talk about. It's like you can build your world as a self-employed person around that peak time in this kind of a creative industry. Not the day you're shooting. It's like if you got to go out at dawn, you got to go out at dawn because that's when the light's right. You know? But
it's all you have to do is go down to C Street at 8:30 in the morning. And like I always had this thought of like, don't any of you work? And then I'm like, well, why am I here? I work. And so we're all surfing.
Well, work's a strong word for us. Kind of wrapping up here, Stephen Schafer, right? Schäf.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for reaching out and just to be able to get together and kind of talk shop with people with experience who've gone through the same thing but have done it differently. I think that's so interesting with photographers, that it's this each photographer does things a little bit different. There's no real mold about it.
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't be so scared about talking to photographers, man.
Yeah, I think the older I get, the more I'll do that, because there's that natural, like when I started out, I'd watch people drive by in new cars and think, how can they afford a payment on anything at all? You know, and there's such a fear of like, how do you make a living creatively? And then to see other people do it in competition. And so I just kind of eliminated myself from anything and just focused on what I was doing and tried to avoid that. But it'll work out more.
Like living, so where he's a big fish in a ridiculously small pond, but his pond has so many
really good architecture.
Right. I was gonna say, like any family who's a family in New York or Boston has a home in Maine.
Right.
And where I'm a very small fry in the second biggest pond, outside of New York City, that it's kind of hard.
Well, you're in a super niche though, so that's the thing. It's like I'm in this niche. My pond's all of America, but really California, because California churns out a lot of HABS, HAER, HALS work. But I've been to, I've shot Cornell. I've shot a water tank in Guam. I'm going to be going out to Big Bend National Park, and
we were just there. A month ago.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
So photographing a building there in Big Bend. So
what building are you shooting?
I don't know that I can tell you
right.
until after it's been delivered to the Library of Congress. At which point you can take that public domain photograph and make coffee mugs with it. It's like it's an interesting world. It's like we didn't even get into the fact that in commercial photography, there's this really strong understanding and value to the copyright. And then you get into HABS photography, and I'm not only delivering negatives, which are a piece of film, to the Library of Congress, but I am sending them a sheet that says I am signing off my copyright and putting these in the public domain. So every photograph I do that gets delivered to them is the people's photograph. And at some point you got to get over that and go, all right, I better charge the developer enough that I am not trying to think that this is my retirement, which was all a pipe dream anyway, because I'm not making any money on my old photography like they said I was going to, because the stock photography world disappeared. I used to be at stock photography catalogs nationwide. So that's a whole different story. But it's an interesting set of ponds, whether you're a specialist or not.
Well, again, thank you so much for being open to just having this conversation and
super
kind of
interesting.
talking shop and comparing lives up to this point, similarities. So thank you so much. Where can people find out more about you? I should say you guys should go out and buy this book, Don't Shoot 66 Reasons Not to Become a Professional Photographer. It says S. Dirk Schaefer. He used his middle name to not confuse Google searches for different reasons. But it's very valuable. A lot of information from someone else who's gone ahead of you and done the same thing maybe you want to do, be it fashion or public domain photography. All the issues are handled in like a single page that you can actually read and remember. So if you're a visual person like me that has a hard time reading, this is really nice. So I sat down and read it yesterday.
Cool.
And I'm almost done with it. I have like 10 more pages to go, and I really appreciate it. So this is really cool. I would highly suggest people get it. Thanks for doing that.
Fun to do. I highly suggest you write a book as soon as your business tapers off, and there's during the next recession when you're not doing anything. That's a great time to write a book.
All right.
Could be sooner than later.
Yeah, it could be tomorrow.
Yeah, and thank you, Chet, for coming too. I've been meaning to sit down with Chet and just pick his brain a little bit too, because he's kind of the reason I'm even able to support my family at this point. Seeing what he and his dad did gave me the idea, like, oh, maybe I could do that. So
right, and not become a dentist.
I would have been looking in people's mouths all day.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been.
It would have been more useful to me if you'd become a dentist.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I mean, you'll have show notes on this. So HABS photographer is sort of my handle on things. So that's one way to find me. It's HABS.
Cool.
Cool, man. Yeah.
All right.
I'm everywhere.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chet. Thanks, Schäf. And let us know if there's anyone, people out there would like talking to. So thanks a lot.
Yeah.